Hey everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church weekly podcast. Conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Hey, Ephrata Community Church, it is great to have you with us once again for our weekly podcast where we like to take time just to go back over the previous service here at Ephrata Community Church. Also take some time at the end to what's coming up here in our Advent season. But special episode today, we're joined by Jim's lovely wife, Rachel.
Yay.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. It was a pleasure, and I know that many people are going to be expecting and very excited about what you're going to be sharing here. You know, one of the things we love to do on this episode is take time to unpack maybe some behind-the-scenes stuff, whether it's words of knowledge or how, you know, what was the service pastor experience behind the scenes, that type of thing is a lot of what we love to cover here on the podcast. And what we will get to in just a few moments is your thoughts as it related to the message that you brought, some of the feedback people experienced from the message, which is positive overall. It always is, but want to give you opportunity to share on that. But first, we've been taking time at the start of each of our podcasts recently to really spend time focusing on the words of knowledge that came this previous weekend, testimonies, and how people have been ministered to by God showing up through that gift, which has been beautiful to observe, and faith building, of course. Right. So, Jim, I'll turn it over to you to kind of lead us into what took place this past weekend. But there is a word of knowledge testimony that
within
Rachel experienced.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'll let you guys just go into that however you would like to.
Good, man. Yeah, thanks. Hey, good to see everybody. Rachel and I had a great time this weekend. For those of you who could be a part of it. If not, check it out. It was above average. I just wanted to say that we've been talking about words of knowledge. Rachel and I had one we didn't have time to go into during the sermon as we were walked through. If you had the chance to hear the message, or at least our story, maybe we better talk for what took place this weekend. We shared with you that we experienced two miscarriages. One that you would consider a part of a broken and complex world. The second one just felt majorly part of a broken and complex world, right? Where you're just like, wow, God, and trust in the midst of confusion. But then there was some words of knowledge that meant a great deal to us. Remember, we've been experiencing here at Ephrata Community Church a surge in words of knowledge, an expectation even around the Lord's usage of them. One of the ones that happened a couple months ago, whether you all were aware of this or not, there was one that meant a great deal to us. Rachel.
Yeah. So we got pregnant the third time with the child we now are expecting on a Saturday. It was actually the day before Mother's Day. And I was filled with so much excitement to be pregnant again and to be expecting this baby again. But because of our two previous losses, had so much fear around okay, but how do I know that this is going to last? How do I know that this one's going to be okay? So the very next day...
Matter of fact, I want to even add some more texture and color.
Yes.
We were driving to church that morning, and I know Rachel well enough to know that. Morning, that next morning, and I know her well enough to be like, hey, sweetheart, you're carrying something, isn't it? I can tell when fear, because it's the beauty about being in a marriage relationship or any committed relationship is you start to be able to track the person's shadow side, the things that they struggle with, etc. So I can sense when something's at work in Rachel. And I was able to say, hey, sweetheart, do you have something you need to share with me? In classic Rachel fashion, beautifully, humbly, just simply saying, Jim, I am surging with fear. Right. And here you are with the excitement of a third pregnancy.
You both knew you were pregnant at this point. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, here you are with the excitement of just recognizing, wow, we are pregnant. And believe me, that was a feat. I mean, there's a part of the story we didn't talk about that it was the 1 month that Rachel was convinced we weren't going to get pregnant. And believe me, she was mapping things. She had such confidence around months. But this month, man, we had several things. We had a really deep emotional challenge happen with someone who's dear to us that just brought us down. Secondly, I was in a head-on collision, man. This was the month that
same week or recently?
It was the week before, 2 weeks before.
Yeah, so just Matt, don't make me break down fertility cycle for you, brother.
Sorry.
But all that to say, let's just say that it's a real bad time to
I want you to break down the fertility cycle for us all. That's
Matt,
good
I'll go
content.
over my fertility app with you later.
Okay, please.
Show you
Believe me, there's an
everything.
app for this.
That's good content.
So I just want to build it was the 1 month, like broken ribs.
Yeah.
Barely commit, right? It is the 1 month, and all of a sudden we find out we're pregnant. So we have all that joy going on.
Sure.
And yet, the fear of previous confusion around the miscarriages was hitting Rachel big time. So on the way to church, she's confessing this to me. Thank you for sharing so openly with me. But
So then at the end of the service, they're doing their words of knowledge, and Wes gets up and says that there's a word of knowledge for a woman who just found out she's pregnant and is having a lot of fear and questions. Wow. So of course I'm looking around like anyone else? Anyone? Just me? Okay.
Rachel and I were supposed to be in the first steps room that day, and all I get, like I'm over in the first steps room. All I get is a text from her because remember I headed over early to open it up, and this word of knowledge hits, and I just get a text. I won't be there.
Yeah, not coming. So several things are going off in my mind right now, and I'm going to do my best to try to hit on them because I want to open up the floor for you to share further. What I loved. So I'll hit one point and then backtrack, okay? So what I loved about your message, of course, everything was just so fun to have you both up there together, just being who you are. And I know that many people would have experienced the same, just delight, right? The 3 points you brought connected so deeply in my heart, not just as points, hey, here are things to consider, but these are like lifelines for people who are in the midst of their trial, their difficulty. You're helping to provide definition for what they're going through. And I want to read the 3 points quickly. And then my question, I'll tell you the question, I'll read the 3 points and give you an opportunity to answer.
Thank you.
But the question is, how did receiving this word of knowledge strengthen the faith that you then had, that the fear that you had, you didn't have to be fearful, or at least God was meeting you where you were? But the 3 points you brought into this message, expectancy is linked to the journey of faith, which I love. If you're going to have faith, then you're going to be expectant.
Yeah. With all the twists and turns, man.
Right. Yeah. Waiting is not the same as nothing happening. And trust means a great deal to the one receiving trust. And so my question to you, when this word of knowledge landed, right, so perfectly timed by God. He saw where you were, and then he provided this encouragement. How did it strengthen your faith going into the very beginning of your pregnancy? This was like, this was the very first experience you had, spiritually speaking, while knowing you were pregnant.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because for me, with the second pregnancy, I had felt like I had a word from the Lord about that specific pregnancy. So on one hand, I was extremely encouraged that this word of knowledge came and was so specific and so accurately described my position.
Sure.
But then there's also a wrestling of what does it mean to know that God knows me and knows where I am, and I can get a word of knowledge and it's still not a promise that everything's going to be okay.
Correct. So is it fair to say that you would have had maybe faith on a word from the Lord for a previous pregnancy? It didn't pan out. And therefore, is there like, I'm not going to get my hopes up? Were you battling that? Were you battling like, you know what, God, there's still the unknown though, and I'm terrified of the unknown. And how did you navigate that?
I think anytime that we're hoping for something, there's always a little bit of a tension of how do you put your hope in the Lord and not in the circumstance of what you want the Lord to bring into your life.
Yeah. So the hope isn't necessarily in the desired outcome, although God's word himself, he's the one who promises to delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. Like this is God's idea, right? It's his nature to perform what he's promised he said he would do. And for many of us, it's like my hope is, of course, in a desired outcome because he's the one who defined the fact that I can have desires, and it's okay. Not only okay, as his children, and he, our Father, delights in his children desiring these things, and yet all of the things happen, that are not necessarily preferred. Jim, did you have some thoughts?
Just a quick thought, and maybe this will get me fired. I hope not. But. Words of knowledge for me, they increase my confidence, but not always my certainty. Like I don't look for words of knowledge to make me more certain, because words of knowledge are from a relationship inviting me into a deeper relationship. And I will have to say this, if we look back even over the words of knowledge we had over our second child, we probably read into them a little bit to make them knowledges about certainty of receiving that child. What we were promised was hope, was God's presence, was God's goodness, God's destiny over a certain aspect of who our characters were. And it's not wrong of us to, quote, do the overread, but I'll remind us that words of knowledge are still words of knowledge between two beings in a relationship, me and God, Rachel and God, Rachel, God, and Jim, right? So it's really beautiful. I would have to say that I want to remind us all that words of knowledge to us on the journey of faith are delightful little guideposts and encouragement points and water breaks on the marathon run. And I want to receive them as such, right?
Yeah, I love that categorically the different words that we share at the end can meet for a present need, and God uses that word to perform a miracle right there for healing, for example. The other need is the I see you category. Like God sees you, and that provokes a response to draw near to the Lord that draws us to himself, which I imagine categorically that would be more where you guys fell into.
That's right.
I feel like there's always this understanding of like, oh yes, of course God knows me, God sees me. But there are moments when it feels like it goes from almost a 2D knowledge to a 3D knowledge.
Okay.
So those little words of knowledge, like someone here is pregnant, and or 2 weeks later, someone who didn't know we were pregnant, we weren't sharing it, came up to me and said, I feel like I need to pray for you. And as she's praying, she said, I feel like I'm supposed to pray for the life that's in your womb right now. And then, of course, I start crying. I'm like, I'm pregnant, I'm scared. Like, but it's all those moments that take it from, oh, yeah, of course God knows me because he knows everything, he knows everyone, to, no, God knows me, he sees me.
That's awesome.
And I'm sorry, I'm now preaching. I just want to remind us, like, there's a reason, Rachel and I chose the Abrahamic model of the faith journey in expectancy, because the promise is so clear. But my words, the paths to get to that promise, the circuitous stuff, that's the texture of life, right? And that's where God wants to join us in. I am so thankful that the certainty model of a straight path between points A and B is not the faith journey model. Or else it would be about some kind of productivity versus some kind of journey with a being.
And then it becomes formula driven. Like, I've done these things, and God, you're supposed to hold up your end of the equation here, and it's not like that at all. So I want to pivot a little bit just to the feedback that you received from the congregation, because you delivered 3 excellent points. The first point you spend the most time on, really, because that
involved our story.
Exactly. And so perhaps you have one point that you, as you observe it, you're like, most people responded to this truth. I would love to give you the opportunity to share what that might be. Maybe reiterate a few points if you felt like you wanted to, but really the floor is yours. What do you feel like people responded to?
Well, there are 2 things that I was really encouraged in the feedback of.
And by the way, we on Sunday, we were there. We were probably there after church later than we've ever been. So that's just important to note. Like that, like I know that the line that I prayed for in the corner was 12 and 14 people deep. And I'll tell you what, because my answer will be related to what I heard in those times of prayer. But anyway, I cut you off.
No, that's fine. So I think the first thing that was encouraging to me, the feedback, I had mentioned in our story on Sunday and Saturday about when I had the first miscarriage, knowing that I was in good company because I knew so many other people who had had miscarriages. So I think the first feedback that I appreciated was other women who had had miscarriages coming forward and feeling less alone in that. And then the second was anyone who was able to say, I have this expectancy of the Lord, or I have these promises over my life that have nothing to do with what your story was.
Right.
But
still expecting the
same. To know that people were able to still apply it to their situations and not just that it was so specifically about what we went through.
Yeah. Was there any, Rachel, for you, specific feedback that came to you that, to get up front and share a message and speak, it's not a small task, right? And so you're pouring out your heart and soul, your story, which is so precious to you. It's kind of like not just giving this out to anybody. This isn't without its emotional toll, I imagine.
And tender points. Still.
Sure.
Yeah.
So was there any point maybe in the feedback, just the response, that you felt like, wow, and maybe not, but like, I'm so glad I did this because this person or that story. Was there anything that took place like that?
There were a few women especially who came up and had some similar struggles that I had. I mentioned briefly about being single for so long, especially in Lancaster, where you just feel like, oh my goodness, what is going on in life that I'm not married yet, I'm not having children, and that's what I want.
The single. I would have to say that the singleness thing was the surprise application
People responding to
But
that.
I remember though, even in being single, if there was a sermon or whatever where someone shared a testimony about infertility and wanted to pray, if their wording at the end was, "I want to pray for any woman in here who wants children and isn't having them," and they mean infertility, but I was always, as a single woman, like, can I go up? I want children. I'm not having them.
Yeah. I'm infertile because I'm single.
I know. I'm like, does that count?
Yes, it does. Come for prayer.
Dude, I love, so you had people, just so I understand, you had people responding saying that one sentence, that paragraph of your 40-minute talk, 2 seconds right there, really helped me. Essentially, the God who sees me, right? You're validating a person's position and saying, God is even Lord in those places, and this was your journey, and you had people responding.
Yes, yeah.
And you really tightened that on Sunday morning, and made sure that people understood that one of the 2 obstacles that she faced was this diagnosis she had as young, and then secondly, I was single well into my 30s. Like, I was approaching what the world calls geriatricness, and I had no one in my life. And you're then challenged, do I change my list of what I'm looking for because of the fear of geriatricness? You know what I mean? Like,
never.
Well, never for you. Praise Jesus.
Yeah, exactly right.
But anyway, we are just so, and maybe this segues into me. Like, I prayed for 10, maybe 12 people. Praise Jesus. Thank you for those moments with all of you who came. By the way, first of all, one man gave his life to Jesus in response to the word about the idol of certainty. So that
was it a boy, or was it?
I struggle with ages.
Okay.
I would say a late teen boy.
That's awesome. Well, late teens. That's a man. I was like, the way you said it, I'm like, oh, this is an older gentleman. Maybe not.
No. And plus, I'm trying to be
Forgive me.
pastorally sensitive to not call out like unbeliever. But 2 people, significant rededications of their life due to idols of uncertainty, realities that slipped into their life. So there's 3 of maybe the 10 or 12. But I would have to say 6, maybe 8 people came up and said, that message reminded me that I carry promises. And we get tired of promises at some point for 2 reasons. 1, they can take so long, or 2, disappointment waves have hit us during the time.
Right.
And disappointment waves reduce your desire to keep believing. Because I got to admit, I am a faithful man. But when Rachel wanted to keep trying to get pregnant, it's one of the first times in my life where I'm like, man, am I up for the emotional drop if we miscarry again? Because friends, you're disoriented for a season.
Right, which actually, not to interrupt you, but your third point where it talks about trust is a big deal to the one who receives trust. Like, essentially you're saying we're choosing to believe that God is who his word says he is. Like, that is setting the history to the side, my past, good or bad. This is present faith. Like,
it is a sacrifice of trust in that moment.
And it is a big deal.
It's worship to God.
And I love that you made that your final point. Although it was brief, it was still didn't lack its impact. And that, to me, I felt encouraged and ministered to by the Father, and I know that we did as a church as well. Just like, God is blessed by your trust, and in this place, although there's uncertainty, although there's ups and downs emotionally, this is a steady ride of I'm moving forward, one foot in front of the other in trust, and God sees it. God is ministered to by it. Like, it's Jason Upton would say, worship leader, trust is the most purest form of worship.
Oh man, dude, I'm there, man.
Which I just love it. When you brought that line, I'm like, oh, the song goes through my head. I'm like, this is just beautiful.
I tried to remind us, like, that Job passage is hard to take it in, but isn't it like, though you slay me, like, it is first person talk to God. Though I could be slayed, I will trust you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine heaven just rising up being like, that is it. And then that little poem I slipped in about Chesterton.
Well, that's Jesus. Like, literally being led to the cross. Though you slay me, I trust you. And Jesus, what do you say in John 14? You just pushed my play button.
Go, dude, go.
He said, the devil, the ruler of this world is coming. And he said, and he has nothing in me.
He has nothing in me.
Like, there was pure 100% trust. Though he slay me. Isaiah 53, it said it was the pleasure of God to let all his wrath rest on Christ. Like, that is just profound things to just pause and reflect upon.
And for Jesus to say, he will raise me up.
Yeah.
Right? And
like, there was no unbelief in Christ as it related to the nature of the Father and trusting him. And I love that you took, both of you, such a purposeful step forward in trust. And I feel like, whether you know it or not, it releases just kingdom anointing on the church to do the same.
Sure.
It's so...
For whatever your promise is. I mean, I love that Kevin got up at the end. None of this is script. Kevin goes up, he goes, I believe that many of you are pregnant with promise and need to revisit those promises, the goodness of God, and to trust. And man, that spirit was released. Just to wrap up what you asked us, great question. So many people were ministered to in promises that we couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And
but yet these truths apply so deeply.
Yay.
Good. Rachel, not you, Jim. Rachel,
Yes.
Would you have any final thoughts before we bring this to a close? Anything that you wanted to say that you didn't have the opportunity to say yet?
No.
Okay. You got it all out there. Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time today to be on the podcast. Jim, always a pleasure to serve with you. This coming weekend.
Do you want to go out to lunch with me afterwards? Sorry, we're turning this into a
It's
date.
okay. Could you please wait till after?
Sorry, my bad.
If I looked at the schedule correctly, this weekend we have Jimmy Nyman.
Jimmy Nyman's coming with a word on expectancy.
So really excited to be able to host Jimmy Nyman, lead pastor of Lifeway Church out of Lebanon. And just really excited for what he's going to bring to continue the series. And then in a few weeks, we have the Service of Remembrance. Check it out on the events page of our website, Service of Remembrance. If you or a loved one lost a loved one recently this year, even previous years, no timeline necessary. If you're carrying just some degree of grief that you would want to just be a part of that service and just be ministered to, we invite you to that. Check out the events page on our website. And of course, the weekend services, the Christmas Eve services that are coming up here for Christmas. Really looking forward to that. But that is all. Thank you guys for being on today. Thank you for being with us for our podcast. And we look forward to being with you this weekend at our services and next week's episode. Till then, God bless.
Have a great week.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening, and that you'll join us again next week. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us by visiting EphphatACommunityChurch.com.